Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad. I'm the founding director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University, and I'm also one of the people who are joining me here, who actually embarked on producing the film about Baghdad. I am extremely excited about this moment where we are actually releasing the film in open source format on YouTube here on Jadaliya YouTube station, which is at youtube.com/Jadaliya. We will also include the URL for the specific URL for the film, so you can access it anytime. First, let me just welcome my awesome colleagues, Sinand, Antoon, Adam Shapiro, Maya Mikdashi, and Suzy Salamy. How are you?
Good, happy to be here.
Great, thanks, Sam.
Hala Maya, hala Sinan. Okay. Thank you all for this. Um uh, well, for coming, right? I mean, everybody's so busy, and it took us a long time to get our schedules um, basically in sync. And we have not actually been together like this, the five of us, for such a long time. I should also say that this event is part of the Iraq 2023, the U.S. invasion of Iraq conference, which we held along with Georgetown University at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies on March 31st. This is part of that larger project, which will also produce a resource portal, as well as the panels that we conducted at Georgetown. And it will all be on the new website, which will be released before the end of April under the title the U.S. or the U.S. the invasion of Iraq. Sorry, let me say this again. The invasion of Iraq.com, and it will all be on there. Links to this film will also be on there, and we will also be having another session in which we reveal the soundtrack that was made for this film, along with the featurette or a glorified trailer which we did that goes with the film, which will not be aired today. Let me start by saying a few words about the film, and then we will go back to a discussion among us about how we experienced the film, its impact, and how it resonated in all of the spaces and places in which we featured it. We will also be following up this conversation with the actual screening of the film, also on the same channel, jadaliya.com/YouTube. Let me just say that the film was the first film made about Iraq, and of course, I'm talking about Baghdad. It was the first film made about Iraq after the fall of the Ba'ath regime in July 2003. It won the Best Documentary Prize at the Big Apple Film Festival in New York in 2004. It is perhaps the first effort to privilege the voices of the Iraqi people after the invasion from all walks of life, as well as social, economic, and ethnic backgrounds. While many have talked about and for the Iraqi people, few media outlets have sought to probe beyond the simplistic binary of pro US, pro Saddam perspective so often found in Western and Arab media portrayals of Iraq. About Baghdad presents Iraqis who describe the pain, um, complexity, and suffering of living under decades of tyranny, oppression, wars, sanctions, and now occupation. Silenced for so long by a regime that sought to replace the people with the image of just one man, and re-silenced by the bombs and occupation forces, the Iraqi people long to speak out and to claim their future. About Baghdad is a small step towards that goal in presenting audiences with their first opportunity to hear unadulterated Iraqi voices that should be privileged regardless of one's perspective on the war and the justifications given for it. Um, Before we perhaps show some clips from the film and feature perhaps some of the music that appeared in the film, let me ask my colleagues and partners in crime about their own experience in terms of getting into Iraq. The film, I should say, followed Sinan back to his places and spaces that he occupied in Iraq before 1991, before he moved to the United States. And we addressed people, as I shared, from all walks of life. And Sinan was essentially the focal point of the film. So let me start with Sinan and then have everyone chime in as to their experience in Iraq. Sinan, the floor is yours. Ahlan wa sahlan.
أهلا بيك. شكرا. Thank you so much, Bassam, for curating this reunion and this release and taking care of all the logistics and being the dynamo that you always are. I'm very, despite the sad anniversary of the 20th invasion and occupation of Iraq, but I'm happy to be back with the posse, with the group that went into Baghdad in what I like to call a guerrilla film in a way, because we made an intervention at a very unique moment with very limited resources. And for me, it was bittersweet to go back to the city and the country that I left in 1991 to escape dictatorship, but to go back to my hometown under a military occupation. But in a way, you said most of what I wanted to say, Bassam, that we, until the invasion, we people had heard from some diaspora Iraqis, but the world never really got a glimpse or an idea about what Iraqis inside Iraq, who were going to pay the heaviest price of this imperial adventure, what they thought. And oftentimes they were represented as stereotypes or reduced to one dimensional human beings. And one of the efforts one of the objectives of the film and one of the effects of the film is to give a panoramic view of the city and of its inhabitants, but also show Iraqis as multidimensional, complex human beings like everyone else. And we were lucky in that the timing of our visit to Baghdad, of course, we didn't have. Had we had more resources, we would have liked to have filmed outside of Baghdad and to go through the whole country, but we had very limited resources. But I think still the portrait and the title is important in that about Baghdad and going about Baghdad. Yes, visiting some of the spots and places that were meaningful for me, but also visiting sites and places that reveal the complex history of the United States involvement in supporting dictatorship and trying to show also the history and the richness of the city and the complexity and of the people who inhabit that city. So I'll stop here.
Anyone would wish to go next? We didn't plan this on purpose, so whoever feels the urge. Don't let me decide. Not without my daughter. That's a film from the 80s, very bad, about Iran or something. Maya, go ahead.
It's a لا. This is somebody else. Please go first.
Suzy?
I was about to say that's a book, then a film. Anyway.
No,
Sure.
go ahead. You already began. Go ahead, Maya. It's a book now.
Well, okay. Thank you, Bassam, for putting this together. I'm really excited to be with my colleagues again to talk about making this film and the conditions under which it was made, and also what the film is and is not an archive of 20 years later. So just at the outset, I want to echo with Sinan that this is a very complex and contradictory moment, I think, for all of us, because we're celebrating a memory that brings us together, and in being together, we have joy. But this memory is built on catastrophe and on a war crime, and on a war crime that is every day sort of disappearing from public memory, public consciousness, and sort of the archive of the contemporary United States. So I just want to echo that and to say, I wish I could have been with you all at Georgetown, which in many ways was also the setting for the genesis of this film, and that brought many of us together, at least. Uh, I think for many of us, for myself included, what really brought sort of the fire under us to this decision to go to Baghdad in 2003 in July was the sort of really dismal um, and insulting mainstream news coverage of both Afghanistan and Iraq. I say insulting because it felt like really very much a sort of violent, intentional insult in really making the issue of Iraq and the issue of the region, the question of the region and US involvement in the region, just blatantly lying and rewriting the long engagement of the United States in the region. And I think we all got very, very angry. I know I did. And part of that also, on a sort of lesser note, was also the coverage in the region itself was also extremely frustrating and did not at all highlight the voice of Iraqis. In fact, it kind of played into this binaristic framework of the war in which there seemed to be no people in Iraq. There seemed to be no people. There were just positions, these binaristic positions, and people were speaking very much on behalf of very sort of these figures that had been constructed as very one dimensional and as really kind of leached of any complexity and of any texture of everyday life. And I think this is where you really see kind of the danger of media representation as well. So, personally, I had never been to Iraq. At the time when we went, I had always wanted to go. I had grown up in Beirut, and Iraq plays a huge sort of role in the region, and in the so I'd always grown up hearing about Iraq, hearing about Baghdad specifically, and also just to be clear, also there was the Iraqi regime's involvement in Lebanon during that time. So also in Beirut, I remember as a child seeing posters of Saddam Hussein in the city, just because of that particular involvement. So I'd always wanted to go to Iraq, and I think being there changed me a lot. When we got there, I had worked as a filmmaker and in television in Lebanon for a few years, but being in Iraq really shifted my life and what I wanted to do with it. And I really think I became an academic because of part of my anger and my experiences in Iraq. So, yeah, I think I'll end there, and I'd love to hear from my colleagues.
Thanks, Maya. Suzy or Adam, please take the floor.
I mean, I think we all have like our very unique entryways into this point, right? I grew up in America. Adam and I think, are the ones who grew up in America. And although I'm Arab American, it is certainly not the experience that Maya had, Bassam, or Sinand, right? So I had been doing a ton of activist work on Palestine, had been to the region a lot, filming. And so when I was brought to this idea 20 years ago through Maya, I jumped on it because it was intriguing. I was obviously impressed with all of you. And I agreed that I was sort of baffled by the coverage, although not surprised on some level because it's America. And I had not been to Iraq either. And I actually turned 27 on our drive from Amman into Baghdad. I remember that drive overnight. And as we were driving, we had the sunroof open. And I'll never forget the stars in the sky, because I'd never since then seen stars like that. And there are two stories to this. It's the story of what we filmed and what we made as a film, and the story of all of us behind the scenes and how we decided to do this, what brought us together, and how it's affected our lives. And like much in the way Maya said, it changed her life. I think it probably changed all of ours to some degree. But I think the power of it is really the way, we were able to use our privileges, because we all have varying privileges here, to bring those voices to life, and to have Sinand be the center point that humanized, Iraqi people in a way that Americans, and they weren't the only audience, but as we've discussed, that we were trying to push the needle there, in a way that could make people want to listen, want to understand, and have compassion and empathy. And I was scrolling through something on my phone, and I heard something about the asshole Tucker Carlson, and one of his quotes early on was talking about Iraq, and he called them semi-literate monkeys, right? Iraqi people. And I mean, that was one of 1,000 horrible things he said over his career. But I think that is on some level what we were up against, right? I mean, we may not have gotten those right wingers to our audience, but we certainly had people who weren't educated. And I think one of the things that I've always found when I filmed in the Middle East is how educated people are on the street, right? It's not just when we went to the university, it's not just when we talked to sort of the elite intellectuals, it was everyone was highly articulate, very expressive, obviously wanting to talk about it. And that is not the way of America, right? So I think one thing I was always very proud of was the way that we were able to showcase that and help people understand who the fuck we were killing, right? And who we were harming, and the lasting impacts of that. And so, we'll see going down the line what influence when we reconvene in 20 years from now, what kind of influence this has had ongoing, in terms of also the influences of all of us bringing the message back, and all of you being professors, and the work that all these are long lasting consequences that I think still have influence to this day. So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah,
Thanks, Suzy.
I came to this project after having been kicked out of Palestine, where I had been an activist, and when Sinand and Bassam talked to me about going to Iraq, now under occupation, I jumped at the chance to encounter yet another occupation in the Middle East. So no, but I've always felt extremely honored and privileged that I was able to participate in this project, and with people that that your audience is now hearing from on screen, my colleagues who made this film, and for all the reasons that have already been said, why this was such a significant project to undertake at the moment that we undertook it. And just to remind folks that listening in, that the coverage that not only just the mainstream media's bias and way that it approached covering the Middle East generally, the way that it covered American wars generally, this was also the biggest sort of effort by the Pentagon to ensure that the media coverage of the war was done a certain way, by bringing journalists to pre-invasion training and boot camps, basically, to cover, to work with troops prior to entering Iraq and figure out how they were going to position themselves and cover the troops going in, and all of that. And it was unprecedented in terms of that kind of, manipulation, in a sense, but a willful manipulation that the mainstream media, participated in, basically the way they would justify it as a way to have access. And what we did was so contrary to that approach, which is obviously reflected both by our own, integrity and positionality, but also it's reflected in the film itself in terms of how we access the Iraqis, not just that we were trying to access Iraqis and give them this platform, but also how that happened, as folks will be able to see in the film, the kind of encounters that we had, which were so radically different from what was seen on CNN or any of the other channels that were broadcasting. And so I think as a piece, as a film, what we did and what we presented, and again, in a day before YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and social media and all of these and cameras, that you can film with at high quality in people's hands everywhere that you walk. What we did was, Sinand called it guerrilla, but I mean, it was even more than that in a way. It's I don't know what the best term would be for it, but
Crazy.
it crazy for sure. I recall one of us or more of us sitting on top of the vehicle filming as we were driving through the streets. Like, absolutely, there was a lot of craziness. But I think what will shine through, what comes through beyond the sort of the authenticity of what the film is this kind of experience of being taken around a place that folks that Americans especially and others had now heard of and seen on their screens to some extent, but obviously in a very filtered way. Now coming and being able to experience to some extent this place at this moment when the world was paying attention and yet not hearing. The world knew of Iraq because of the invasion and everything that happened as a result, but didn't know anything really about this place. And I hope that this film, for people watching it even today, still offers some insight and forces them to reckon with what they think they know about a place, not just Iraq, any place that they learn about or want to learn about, and come to terms with how to better do it.
Thanks, Adam. I'll just say that this film was born out of a desire to provide an alternative to what we have been witnessing at the time in the traditional media. I quickly will say that I had met Sinan in 1992-93 at Georgetown University, and we, together with a number of other people, embarked on developing the Arab Studies Journal. And we were at the time graduate students who were interested in academic knowledge production, but recognized quickly that we journal articles don't get read very widely, and so we developed an interest in doing something that involves an audiovisual dimension. And there was no plan, but of course, unfortunately, the first event that appeared was basically the invasion of Iraq, and we decided to go and um, basically chronicle what is going on at the time. Of course, Sinan is from Iraq and knows the lay of the land extremely well. At the time, I was myself teaching a course at Georgetown, a graduate course on the politics of Iraq, and was very interested in the country since I was a kid. I would listen to Iraqi music. My parents would play Iraqi music at home as well as everything else, of course. But Iraq was very much a part of my upbringing in so many ways, including, of course, their football team. And we decided to go, and we actually asked these amazing people who are also nuts if they would like to come with us to Iraq when everybody was fleeing Iraq, and they all said yes. And we did go to Iraq, and our main, at least one of our main goals was to address this idea of how we're opposed to, of course, the regime in Iraq, the regime of Saddam Hussein, as well as the U.S. invasion, or any U.S. invasion, frankly, to be blunt, right? And we were trying to help navigate how can we tell a story that doesn't absolve any party, but at the same time humanizes Iraqis and addresses the situation from an inside out perspective, from a perspective of what's going on in Iraq, not from a perspective of was it right to invade Iraq? What should the U.S. do? Was the problem that they didn't have a plan to deal with the situation after the war? These are irrelevant to us. They should be irrelevant to anybody interested in the region. Maybe just relevant to the foreign policy officials in the United States who are looking to preserve whatever interest they think they want to preserve. But from a perspective that is not a foreign policy perspective of the United States, it was not important. This discussion that was happening between Democrats and Republicans at the time was literally ridiculous to most ears around the world. And what we wanted to do is bypass it and go look at what's happening in Iraq, what Iraqis think about the invasion, about Saddam Hussein, about their decades of war, sanctions, and a couple of invasions by then. So that's the story we went to tell, and we were very fortunate that we were able to tell it. None of us was harmed, and we were able to screen the film in more than 250 locations around the world. It won an award, which I brought with me because I usually forget to bring it out. It's right here. So, I have a camera that is up close camera. I'll do it. I'll use it right now. There we go, right here. So this is the award, the best film, best documentary award, which we're very proud of. And I'll go back. Oh no, how am I gonna go back now? Jesus Christ. Now I'm stuck. Are we all here now? Okay, we're all back. Excellent. So basically, this is what we did. And we have a few reviews actually to share with you. But before any reviews and before any sort of complications that might arise, I would like to show a clip from the film. And I would like to also say that the person that you're listening to singing is the person who sang the soundtrack, which we will talk about a bit later. But at this moment, I would like to move to the clip from the film, and it's self-explanatory, so I will not introduce it for too long. It's basically a street debate, which we encountered almost at every turn.
صار لنا 6 اشهر لا شغل ولا عمل، هاي بس شوارع نروح ونرجع. خلي عزلوا الاسرائيلي شهر. نريد من الشعب احنا نريد من الشعب منا من الشارع. نريد من عندنا وبينا، بس اسمح لي، احنا نريد من عندنا وبينا. عانى ويانا، جاع ويانا، عطش ويانا، ركض ويانا، اجا ويانا، عاش ويانا البيت، اكل ويانا بماعون واحد. هذا اللي نعرفه احنا. مو 40 سنه عايش بالخارج، يجي اذا ولا حكم علاني اصير حاكم عليكم ودير بالكم. اقول لك لا اقترح الامريكان حررونا، احنا نشكرهم، حررونا نشكرهم. بس هسه حاليا صدام ماكو انتهى صدام. احنا هسه نحكي نفسنا، احنا هذا نريده فقط لا غير.
مقابر جماعيه من سنه 68 لحد الان 40 سنه. ملينا ماكو ديمقراطيه، لا اكو حكم دكتاتوري اجرامي، كل انسانيه ما عنده. مجرد انت تنطي رايك على صدام حسين تنعدم.
هم ما يريدوا استقرار، ما يريدوك تستقر، ما يريدوك تعيش. لان ينهبوك، يبوقوك. قنينا غاز، احنا بلد انتاجي نفطي 15,000. غاز ماكو، بنزين ما عندنا، كهرباء ما عندنا، ما يقطعوا علينا، البحطات تفتر فوق بيوتنا، ضربوا عماره وقت البارح. ليش؟ شو مسوي لهم احنا؟ مو قايلين احنا جاي بسلام؟ مو جاي نخلصكم من الحزب اللي تجدوا هذا؟ مو مضطهدينكم؟ سووا لنا. مو بس هذا، حتى العرب، هاي الدول العربيه ما تاكلها، قاعد تتفرج علينا، ايش حصلنا من عندهم؟
آلاف العراقيين او بالمئات الالوف مدفونين احياء هم. ما حد حكى من الصحافه العربيه، من الاقلام العربيه ما قالوا صدام حسين دفن مئات الالوف من العرب، من العراقيين عربا واكرادا اندفنوا في مقابر جماعيه، ما حد حكى به.
بالنسبة للدول العربية إذا اسمح لي، أول شيء الدول العربية ناس جشعين وطماعين وقاعدين بس مجرد على الكراسي، ما عندهم لا عروبة ولا عندهم غيرة على العربية ولا عندهم وطنية، هاي ترى كلها شعارات وكلاوات مجرد يضحكون على المواطن العربي. المواطن العربي والشارع العام هو اللي يحكي ويعبر عن الأخوة والعلاقة ما بين العرب، ولكن القادة العرب كلهم غير صالحين وليس قائدين إلى هاي العروبة.
نحسب نفسنا لما نشوف واحد يطالب برحيل الامريكان، ليش رحيل الامريكان؟ هو من حرر العراق غير الامريكان؟ حررنا من صدام حسين. الدول العربيه اللي كانوا ياخذون فلوسنا يقولون الامريكان جاي ياخذ فلوس العراقيين، لا هذا كذب. حتى اذا اخذوا 50% نعم الله 50% بقعنا، صدام حسين كان ياخذ 95% الى 5 ينطي الشعب العراقي.
الجنوب هسه لا نفط لا غاز لا بنزين. جنوب واحنا طلعتنا بذاك الوقت وهسه طلعتنا بزايد. طلعت امريكا وصدام.
احنا العوز لو سمحت لي، العوز خلى العراقي
منو سببه؟
سببه صدام حسين.
خلاص احكي.
اما الولايات المتحده خليني احكي، ما قاطعتك انا. واشغلتنا قوات التحالف بما هو اسوء، خلتنا ننزع الضمير. احنا الان ماكو داعي ننتظر الماده القانونيه تحمي الشارع، المفروض ضمائرنا تحمي الشارع. بالوقت اللي كانت الدبابه واقفه وتسمح للمواطن العراقي يسرق، ما قالت له اوقف. ليش؟ لسواد عيوننا اجت التحالف؟
لا طبعا لا. انا البارحه سلفت سكينه بيدي
عربيه
وهاي راس ضربه هناك بمديه وكسروا فتشي وحتى الهالك 110,000 بالشارع العام. بالشارع العام نريد الامان بس، الامان بس انطونا اياه، ما نريد لا امريكا ولا غير امريكا، نريد الامان بالشارع العام.
انا عندي مشكله الان اعاني منها اسمها بطاله. شغل الشعب العراقي ماكو سرقات. البطاله تخلق.
ليش توضح هذا؟
اخي التحالف
بغداد
التحالف اجى بالدبابات ب 24 ساعه، التحالف ما يقدر يجيب وياه بواخر بها مولدات كهربائيه. لو سمحت لي
مواد كيميائية انذبت بالأرض وبدت تتفجر منه وبيها. هاي اللي سوته بيها. هون كانت المكتبة البنات الموظفات بالطرف الثاني، بس هنا كانت عبارة عن ميوزة وكراسي يقعدون بها الطلاب. الأوركنديشنات كانت موجودة هنا سرقت، والبناية هنا حرقوها. حولنا الرابط اللجنة الاتحادية السابقة إلى مكتبة صغيرة نلم بها كتب وأطاريح نعوض ما فقد من عندها، حتى الطلاب يستمروا صار عندهم حماس بالدراسة أكثر.
الطيارة ليش يضرب بناية عتيقة؟
ليش معنى على المكتبة؟
ليش معنى على المكتبة؟
ليش مو بالحديقة؟ لأن هذا أهم شيء بالكلية كليتي. وهذا مستقبل الدراسات العليا بالعراق.
لا هم
أعز شيء ببلدنا هو هذا التاريخ.
طبعا لا طبعا.
ويعني بدون سبب هيك، يعني أنا أخوي راح، بس يمكن من أجي بالكلية ألتهي أدرس، بس من أشوف هيك بعد تزيد مأساة.
هاي حريق بس من غير مكتبات أخضر.
من هم يعني؟
I don't know anything.
30,000 كتاب بها رسومات أو كتب أجنبية لرسامين عالميين أصليين، أطاريح من سنة السبعينات من أساتذتنا اللي جايين من دول الاشتراكية دول أمريكا مترجمة، كلها كانت هونك احترقت.
صدام حسين كان ظالم جائر قاسي، يعدم يسجن، عنده من الاستبداد شغلات هوايه، يدز شرطه تستفز العالم، قوات الامن هوايه، بس كنا عايشين نطلع نشتغل. يعني انا كنت اشتغل عن نفسي احكي لك سايق، كنت اشتغل ل3 بالليل لل4 بالليل، ليل ونهار نشتغل. امرت النفط يعني انا بالنسبه لي قبل لا يصير الاحداث قلت لهم وزاره النفط ما تنبر، قالوا قلت لهم هم جايين علينا. اغنى مؤسسه بالعالم هي وزاره النفط العراقيه. لحد نفس الوضعيه، هم هسه يشتغلون نفس سياسه صدام حسين. صدام حسين كان معيش العراق بدوامه، يوم ازمه بنزين، يوم ازمه غاز، يوم ازمه مي، يوم ازمه مواد غذائيه، يعني خلصت الازمات قلل التمن، قلل الدهن، قلل الطحين، قلل الحانه دايخه. فهم عايشون بنفس الدوامة حتى الآن يعني الشعب العراقي يلتفت لهم أو يطلع مظاهرات أو يقاومون.
ما شفنا أي تحسن، الأوضاع زادت سوء، بس نتأمل إنه يتشكل يعني شيء يمثلنا إحنا صدق، مو مجرد وعود أو يريدون بس يوصلون للحكم.
المنجوي اختاروهم مثل أحمد الشلبي أو الباتشي، صار له 20-25 سنة هو بأمريكا وبلندن وبدول أوروبا. شو يعرف أنا بنت اللي ولدت عمري 10 سنين دخلت حرب إيران، عشت 91 الحرب الأمريكية وعشت هذه الظروف. أنا أقدر أعرف شعبي أحس بينه أكثر من اللي عاش بأمريكا. هو صحيح عراقي بس عاش بأمريكا ما يعرف شكو، فبالتالي الأمريكي من راح يجي أيضا هو ما يعرف شو يريد العراقي، ما يعرف شو يحتاج الشعب العراقي. أنا كما دا أقول الإنسان ابن بيئته، أنا بيئتي هذه أعرف شو أريد، أختار أنا أعرف شو أريد. لكن يجي أمريكي يعرف شو أريد أنا، شلون أفكر، شلون أعيش، شو أحتاج، لا، وبالتالي فهو محتل.
جينا وما لقينا.
All right. This is a clip from the film. We will be actually screening the entire film after this conversation, also on the same URL, Jadaliya, youtube.com/Jadaliya. So let me show a couple of pictures and share also maybe a couple of notes on the film, which were actually quite nice. A review of the film by Ala Shohat, which I think brought the message home. I would like to read it. It's a bit long, so I'll try to. Where is it? I think we have it right here. Actually, let me ask either Suzy or Adam to read the New York Times or the Christian Science Monitor review, and then I'll show the Al Shahat review. Whoever would like to volunteer. Maybe we'll try somebody with no accent.
The New York Times. We were going to have a screening of the film in a movie theater in New York City. It was our theatrical debut for the film on the Lower West Side of New York City, and so the New York Times reviewed it and said, the film's most persistent theme is the Iraqi will to self-determination. Words spray painted in Arabic on a building read, "Iraq will be ruled by Iraqis." A student expresses hope that the future textbooks will read, "Baghdad did not fall, Baghdad was occupied." Again and again, those interviewed bear witness to the humiliation of living under another's rule, be it Saddam Hussein's or that of a foreign occupier.
Hello.
Thanks, Adam. Actually, let's go to the pictures. Sinan, since you are sort of our sheikh in this endeavor, we will ask you to comment, and of course, anybody else can comment, because these are, this is a small, select number of pictures, so it's not going to exhaust anything, but I would like to show them and ask for some commentary on them. Here we go. And let me do this. All right. So this is, I'll start. Okay, I lied, because I'm going to start by saying that this is the cover of the DVD about Baghdad, which we are going to release in open source format. It was produced by Arab Film Distribution, with John Sinno leading the way at Arab Film Distribution, which was a very major distribution, basically outfit that produced and or distributed films about and on the Arab world. Of course, the film will now be available in open source, but you can still get the film at Arab Film Distribution. Let me go to the next one and ask Sinan to address this, which we just saw in the film. You are muted, I think, Sinan.
Yes. This is the library of the Academy of Fine Arts in Baghdad, which was bombed. And as the clip that we showed said by Professor Rawa Shaya, who used to teach there, that of course the entire library was torched and destroyed, thousands of books. And the Department of Audiovisual Arts, cinema department, was also bombed. We show, I think, a clip of that in the film. This, of course, this institution is like a lot of educational institutions in Iraq, has a long history, and it has produced amazing artists and cadres, actors, painters, sculptors. This is one of my, it's very sad, but one of my favorite images that we took in Baghdad, because it shows the devastation. And I think especially for those who are students or who are in the educational field, they can imagine the unimaginable. What would it mean to go to your institution and see that it's become a target for military bombing?
Anyone else would like to comment?
I think one thing that I remember is the audiences in America saying, why would they have bombed that? Right? I think it begs the question, and it makes them think harder about what we did, what America did, and the military did, and who they bombed, who they injured, who they killed. And when confronted with that kind of image, it's a university, it's, especially if we were showing it at a university, it's relatable. And I think it didn't allow people to turn away as easily. It forced a question.
Maya? You're muted.
I love this photo too. And I remember walking also with our little camcorder and filming myself just walking in like the ashes of books and dissertations and people's lives and works and an entire intellectual history and artistic history. And the ashes were so thick that, your footsteps would literally sort of sink into them. I often find it interesting what does and does not affect American audiences. I think obviously it should affect them. It shouldn't surprise them that wars also destroy the past as much as they destroy the present and the future. But I was also struck sometimes by how some people would get more pensive over the destruction of objects than of people, and of entire sort of life worlds. So I think about all these things when I see this image, and it also sadly reminds me that this is not unique to Iraq. The destruction of spaces of learning, of archives, of libraries is part of the history of war, certainly part of the history of war in the Middle East.
I'll say something, and then Adam, feel free to. I'll say that this image for us was perhaps the most used image in all of the production that we did on the film, and it was emblematic of what's happening in Iraq, not just because of the destruction, but also because of the deformity of the windows and the almost like 3D version of catastrophe. So for me, because I was with everyone doing a lot of these shows, but I think I I actually traveled the most, which was very taxing on my on my own family. But I always use this picture, and that's why I wanted to make this remark. Um, I couldn't find any other picture that captures what we were looking for. And the one thing that I want to add is that whenever we would go to different places, we get ready to leave because there's like a war, and we always find ourselves looking for Maya, and then we find her in some area in the space we're in, taking these shots, which at the time we didn't understand. Why the hell was she like getting so close to the corner in the given space, and really up close? And then of course we ended up using a lot of her shots. Okay, I'll stop here. Adam.
No, you guys definitely captured it all.
Okay, so let's go back to the next shot. Let me see. Adam, you have to start because we talked a lot.
Yeah, this is a classroom that we came across, and it was eerie, right? To just encounter this room looking like this, perfectly set up for a class that wasn't happening, but also this was a way to sort of begin to understand some of the devastating effects of sanctions. That this was what a higher education classroom looked like in 2003, and without anything that you would expect to see at a place of higher learning. And this, of course, in a country that had been known for in the region and even in the world for its the quality of its higher education, the quality of its education system in general. And so it was definitely shocking to come across this, but also quite eerie to just see this empty space in the middle of the day when students should be there, but of course weren't.
And this is basically emblematic of the generations that sort of were not able to get a proper educations, or the generation, or primarily one generation. But that also had an impact on all of us. I'll skip unless somebody wants to say something. Going once. Okay.
Adam should talk about this.
Absolutely.
So everywhere we went, as I remember, or most places we went where we were filming, eventually and this happens in many places, in my experience filming, kids tend to gather and come out to watch what we were doing. And in this case, we had been in the home of a woman who was a prominent lawyer in Iraq, but who had run afoul of the regime because she dared to defend the rights of somebody who was working for one of Saddam's sons, and took a case to court, which was, of course, not tolerated, and she suffered immensely as a result. Her house, of course, she lived in a neighborhood, and I forget what neighborhood it was, but and everyone knew that this was her house. She had lost her mental abilities, her mental capacities had suffered greatly as a result of torture and all the experiences she had. And so she was known kind of in the neighborhood as the crazy lady. And so the kids had come to, drawn to that house, but also drawn to us, and were curious. And so we were just kind of engaging with them afterwards, and got them for this really beautiful photo, which, these could be kids anywhere in any street, anywhere in the world. But this was Iraq, and what they had already endured over the previous months, but even in years of their lives, with war and sanctions and the devastation of their society, is unfathomable in many ways.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I wanted to just add that we did see, children everywhere, and I think it's a universal truth that anywhere around the world, if you bring out a camera, children are fascinated, and they want to know what's happening, and they want their picture to be taken, and they want to be recorded. When I see this and the happiness in this photo, and listening to Adam, and how he interacted with children also was a beautiful thing to see. I also remember another moment which was not so great, which was when we were on the highway trying to get to, I believe, Abu Ghraib. Somebody correct me. And there had been there was a body bag on the highway with U.S. and a convoy of U.S. troops. And on the other side of the highway, because we got out and were filming, there were children gathered who wanted to be recorded and who wanted their pictures taken. And there was a translation problem between these American soldiers who thought these children were mocking the person who had been killed and who was dead on the highway. And these children who were like unfathomable to them, right, as just children doing what children do, and as children living through a war. And I remember that moment being really kind of a stark example of all of the just contingent and unexpected and sort of multiple kind of things that can happen in any one interaction, some of them being very catastrophic and terrible, and all of these moments that did happen during the occupation and afterward, I mean, during the invasion and occupation, where a moment of simple misunderstanding can lead, and not, I mean, I say misunderstanding, but it's a misunderstanding backed by the capacity to kill you. And this happened over and over again, and people were massacred based on these interactions. So when I see these children happy, I also think of all the other children who were put in situations that are, the situation of war, and this war came to them, and it irrevocably changed their life, and now they're 30, 40, maybe not 40, 30s, late 20s, and they've lived through other wars also.
All right, I'll go to the next one. This was taken in one of the most, for us, probably one of the most interesting places we've been to, which is a cafe in which people were just lounging, and it really spoke volumes about the mood. And this kid was just looking at us, and either I or Maya took this picture, and it also means a lot to us. And somebody said before, I think, I'm not sure when, that one of us said that it almost looks like it's superimposed on this picture. He's like sort of out of this world coming in and just looking at us and wondering what kind of life they will lead. So yeah.
Can I say something?
No, actually, you can't. Iraqis spoke enough in this film.
I should just remind ourselves and everyone that this was before satellite channels, the explosion of satellite channels in Iraq, and the explosion of social media everywhere in the world. And this was only a few months after the collapse of the Iraqi regime. And we were fortunate in that people were very thirsty to tell their stories. And they had not yet been jaded, because also all the suicide bombings had not started. Terrorism had not entered the country, courtesy of the United States destroying Iraqi sovereignty. But people were just very thirsty to tell their stories to the world. And I think when we went to Al Dijal, where there was the first public commemoration for those who were killed for the assassination attempt against Saddam Hussein, we filmed interviews with so many people, and then people were coming up, and we ran out of tape. And when we were telling them
Mhm.
that we don't have any more tape, that to me that was one of the most moving and uh, telling moments about what it means to tell people stories, where they said, "It's okay, I just want to tell you my story and testimony." Um, so I think the same goes for these pictures, and people thirsty to tell their stories to the world and to chronicle what they had gone through.
But I think also we can't underestimate it. It wasn't just telling their stories; it was telling their stories really to you, or to or to Bassam or Maya or me or Adam. I mean, I was behind the camera, but and to have someone understand them first person, right? There wasn't a translator involved. You were from there, and the power of that is actually we can't understate that. I think that that is a whole other transformative healing power, actually, to be frank, for them to be able to externalize their trauma, to tell their story, and to have people who understand the culture validate and honor them. And I think that's what we did.
No, and I guess I'll just also add that they were, thanks to our knowledge and our interest in the region and the country. And I should mention that Bassam and I also were fortunate to take courses with Hanna Batatu, who probably wrote the greatest book on Iraq. But what really meant a lot to our interlocutors, the Iraqis we met, that they realized that we knew a lot of details about what had happened in Iraq during Saddam Hussein's time, under the Ba'ath 91 and the sanctions. And that meant a lot, and that, I think, encouraged people to speak at length, because they realized that their interlocutors were actually, we had the desire to listen. I think that's a problem across the board in a lot of media, of course, but that especially in mainstream media nowadays, that it's not about it's about the presenter or the person posing the questions. But for us, of course, we
Mhm.
had to be there. We had to be the vehicles, but we were genuinely interested in what Iraqis had to say. And of course, knowing the language, and that makes someone feel at home and speak out.
Yeah, I remember going to the I don't remember if it was the New York Times or the Washington Post, going to the journalist's house that was in this basically what I like, a villa, a palace with a pool. And I remember being and it was so shocking to, and maybe I was naive, but it was so shocking to see how journalists were actually moving around the city, and they were moving around with armed guards who were sometimes also translators. And I remember walking to the kitchen of that villa and just seeing like a whole rack of Kevlar vests, and there was all this sort of securitization of what was happening, and we were just literally walking around the city. That's sort of how we were doing it, and it was just such a I'll always remember um, being in that villa, and you know
I should,
like it was a
I should
moment of realizing the conditions of producing media also.
But I think we should explain to the viewers that, of course, we were filming every day from 6 o'clock in the morning until night. And but one day, when we were very tired, I had met a journalist in Cairo who was in Baghdad, and these, I think, 3 or 4 journalists who were working with the major newspapers were all living in one house. And she invited us to go there, and we thought this would be a good break for us after filming for 10 days, just to go. And yes, that was also a very instructive moment. And because that journalist was in Baghdad for 2 months and they didn't know whether they were in Karkh or Rasafa. That's how they're clueless. And as you said, Maya, because they have all of these fixers. And I remember that at the time we had talked to Iraqis who were very concerned, as we see in the clips, about electricity, about water, about services, about security. And I asked that journalist, so what are you writing about? And she said, I'm writing about the Constitution. And of course, the Constitution became important later, but during those days in July, not a single Iraqi we met was concerned about the Constitution, which perhaps should not surprise us. But of course, they were living with 24-hour electricity, with a swimming pool, and so they knew very little about what were the concerns of Iraqis.
Maya, you outed yourself when you said villa انك لبنانية twice. All right. Thank you guys. Before we go to the next picture, I would like to read Ella Shohat's review, which is very interesting. Unless somebody else wants to read it. Ella Shohat, professor at New York University, wrote that About Baghdad is a stunning achievement, at once soulful and analytical, a veritable ode to Iraq. One of the filmmakers' return to Baghdad is far from being merely a geographical tour of post-Saddam Iraq. Rather, it is a voyage into the carnage inflicted on the psyche of a people abused by decades of massacre, rape, and torture, compounded by wars, sanctions, and occupation. Given the absence of Iraqi people speaking on the American media, About Baghdad provides a refreshing polyphony of Iraqi voices. Profoundly democratic in the true sense of the word, the film relays a non-monolithic representation of Iraqi people in terms of class, ethnic, religious, and gender backgrounds, I guess, should be an SIC here, while also providing a full range of political perspectives, including communist, feminist, and Islamist. On trial are Saddam, the Ba'ath Party, Arab and Muslim governments, along with the US and other imperial powers that allowed directly and indirectly the prolonged mutilation of Iraq, interweaving a variety of Iraqi traditional songs to underscore a point or to illuminate the painfully absurd aspects of Iraqi existence. This chronicle of 2003 summer visit to Baghdad turns the film into an unforgettable instance of contemporary cinema verite. Again, this is by Ella Shohat. I'll play some music in the background and maybe I'll ask Sinand to say something about the singer.
مالي شغل بالسوق مريت أشوفك مالي شغل بالسوق مريت أشوفك عطيشان حفن سنين واروى على شوفك عطيشان حفن سنين.
Sinan, would you like to say something about Amr Tawfiq? And I'll probably I'll turn it down a little bit.
Yes, we had heard that. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
While we were in Baghdad, we heard that some of the artists and the musicians and the students of music were going to get together in July and have a concert just to kind of express their desire to go back to some sense of normalcy and to continue life. And I think it was Bassam, you heard Amr Tawfiq singing, and I remember you coming and saying you should come and listen to this guy. But so Amr Tawfiq was, because sadly he passed away a few years ago, was a mentor to hundreds of Iraqi singers and musicians. He was actually the teacher of the famous Kazim al-Sahir, and he was so generous with us, and what we were trying to do.
Sorry.
So he agreed to go with us to a studio in Azamiya nearby, and he knew what the film was about and recorded Some of the songs I think Bassam and I suggested, but he knew also what the themes of the film were going to be and recorded songs from the Iraqi repertoire. He has an amazing voice, and he's also a very accomplished oud player. And that became the soundtrack of our film. And Amr Tawfiq stayed in Baghdad, and a few years ago he actually applied to it's one of these famous competition programs, The Voice, I think, and he advanced to the final stages. And I think that the re-releasing the film and making it available is also an opportunity for Iraqis to know about Amr Tawfiq. And I think actually one of his students is already constructing an archive online for all of his work, and he was asking me about the film. So this is also to salute Amr Tawfiq, who is in a way, his voice participated in making the film what it is, because almost whenever we showed the film, people, Iraqis and non-Iraqis, were really moved by the music and the singing.
Absolutely. And let me also say that we are going to feature the entire album that he recorded in Baghdad in the future, in a similar conversation in which we will actually play all the songs because they are really remarkable. I was this morning when Sinand called me, we were talking about the recording this show. I was in a very emotional mood because when you listen to this man, it's a soulful trip, and we will make this available so that anybody can download and listen to the entire. We own the copyrights, and we're not trying to sell anything. We don't hardly ever sell anything at the ASI except for the books that we actually print because they're printed and that costs money. So we're making it available as well. And during that conversation in the future, we will also be showing the featurette, or this glorified trailer we talked about, which is mostly about Sinan talking about the film while we were in Baghdad. A lot of people like this just as much as actually they like the film. So we will be doing that, and then we will also release it on YouTube. So I will get rid of our friend Amal Tawfiq here. May he rest in peace, and ask Sinan to comment on this last picture before we go to another clip, and then we will start winding down.
This is the statue of Abu Nuwas, one of the most famous poets in the Arab canon, and there is a very famous street alongside the river in Baghdad that's called Abu Nuwas Street. I think the statue was made also by one of the major Iraqi artists of the 20th century, Muhammad Ghani Hikmat, in 1971, and we went there to film because it's an iconic spot and in a way references Iraq's deep history and its centrality in Arabo-Islamic history and culture. And as you can see, the platform, and this other picture is of Shahriyar, the character from the 1001 Nights, otherwise known as the Arabian Nights, listening to Shahrazad telling him her stories. And as you can see, sadly, the platform of both statues, the base, is damaged from the bombing.
حلوة عبادي يم العباية حلوة عبادي ويا سمرة هواية زينب صفاتك زينب صفاتك يم العباية حلوة عبادك يم العباية حلوة عبادك ويا شقرة هواية زينب صفاتك زينب صفاتك يا بنت عمي.
خلاص على بنت عمي حشيلة فضحنا. Okay, guys, let's go to another clip that was recorded at the let me see, at the Chamber of Commerce, which is very telling about the politics of what was going on regarding who actually welcomed the presence of the Americans or the invaders. And we'll talk about it after. Assalamu alaikum.
الحديد على الحديد ووالي تسمع له
الحصار الاستيراد كان محدود ضيق.
وشو كان
هسه بالعكس هسه مفتوح. هسه التاجر العراقي حسب ما يشوف المتطلبات الحاجه الشعب العراقي اللي يريدها يروح يستوردها راسا بدون اجازه من كل العالم يستورد.
الشعب معه فلوس يدفع
موجود فلوس الحمد لله رحمه الله.
لواردات من الخارج
موجود دولار موجود بكثره كمياتها ياخذون رواتب بالدولار.
هلا مين عم ياخذ رواتب؟
كل الموظفين بالدوله قاعد تقبض بالدولار. كل الموظفين. البطاله موجوده البطاله بس مو ذيك الكميات الكبيره.
كيف نسمع 70% بطاله بالعراق.
70%؟ اي وين اكو 70%؟
لا مو 70 نسمع
ماكو
40% ممكن.
يعني
نص
اي بس حبيبي اي عائله بيها بطاله بنسبه معينه بس اكو مقابلها نفس العائله يشتغلون. هي بعد الضربه بعد ما دخلوا الامريكان كل قام تشتغل لان قام تتوفر المواد الاوليه راسا.
يعني انتم كقطاع خاص فرحانين انه
طبعا انا شخصيا انا بالنسبه لي كرئيس غرفه يعني هواي مرتاح من جو الامريكان.
بس انت برايك القطاع الخاص حيقدر يوظف عماله مثل ما كان يوظف القطاع العام؟
اكثر يعني هسه كل دول العالم تصدر بضائع الى امريكا بكوتا، الدوله الوحيده بدون كوتا هو العراق هسه. فانا هسه بكره اذا شغلت المصنع مالتي حصدر كل انتاجي الى امريكا والاسعار تقريبا اريدها.
طيب كيف عم تشتغل هالمعامل اذا الكهرباء مش متوفره، اذا المي مش متوفره، اذا البنيه التحتيه
اسمح لي الكهرباء صح مو متوفر بس المي موجود. المي صح يتقطع بس ممكن ياخذنا متوفر المي بقى الكهرباء اجيب مولدات وتشتغل موجوده
بالفتره
يعني
ممكن تصحح الامور.
يعني الحمد لله كل شيء تمام بالعراق.
هسه احنا اذا تسمح لي هسه احنا
كل شيء ماكو. شلون مش دخلي مواطن دا يسال شو اسمه صحفي دا يسال واجاب انا دا يسال وجهه نظر الكل. اي وجهه نظر الكل نعم. ليش؟
هلا انا بخلص مع الاستاذ نحكي معك معلش. فينا نحكي معك بعد ما نخلص؟ فيك تستنى؟ بعدين نحكي معك. طب معلش لكن
هذا الرجل ترى ما اعرفه لا بالغرفه ولا كل شيء وما له علاقه بالغرفه الرجل ما نعرفه ما نعرفك انت منو. خلي بجيبك
شارع الغرفه
خلي بجيبك
منين جاي انا؟
جيبي جنبك من الشارع.
من الشارع. الغرفه حاليا بدها تقبض رسوم يوميه 6 ملايين. لا شبابيك لا جام لا كهرباء لا تنظيم. كهرباء ماكو بالبلد، مي ماكو بالبلد، بطاله موجوده.
قديش البطاله؟
البطاله هوايه فوق ال 70%، هو قال لك 50% لا 80% بطاله، وساعه ب 12 بالوحده تعزل شارع الرشيد يعزل يروح. موجود تسليم موجود، يوميا 4-5 قتله بالشارع. يعني هذا مو حقائق هم اللي يحكوها، خلي يحكون الحقائق للبلد. كان الوضع يعني وضع صدام حسين مو خوش وضع، تمام مضطهدين احنا كعراقيين، بس اكو استقرار، اكو امن، اكو نومه راحه.
بالنسبه للعمل
العمل موجود والتجاره موجوده بس مو نظاميه، يعني بس الربعه.
يعني احنا
All right, folks. There's two of me. Let's make it one. All right, folks. So let's go to the last bit about the pedagogic uses of this film potentially. And before we do this, let me just say that this film was produced initially by something called Encounter Productions, which is a organization that we created for that film. And of course, then it was wrapped into Quilting Point, which ended up being the main producer of the film. It's this bigger operation that's part of the Arab Studies Institute, which sort of subsumed Encounter Productions and became the official producer of this film, which also continued to produce a couple of more films, including What Is Said About ... Arabs and Terrorism, which is the main title, and then a film titled The Other Threat, with other in quotation marks, which we worked on diligently, two of these films. And then, of course, we continued under the rubric of Quilting Point to produce shorter films to comport with the attention span of viewers worldwide. In all cases, let me go back to this discussion, a quick discussion of the pedagogic tools of this film. How can this film be used in the classroom? I'll start with Sinan. So many of us have actually shown this film in the classroom. Various peer-reviewed journal articles addressed this film as one of the most authentic films and actually studied it, which is a huge, flattering moment for all of us. But let's see, Sinan, how might this film and why might this film still be relevant to show in the classroom or parts of it?
Well, about a year or two ago, as several of our colleagues who teach Middle Eastern studies and history and politics were having a conversation on Twitter and on Facebook saying how their freshman students who are of a different generation know very little or close to nothing about the invasion. And that's a product of the kind of education that exists in the United States, but also of the media. And because we are in the United States, of amnesia. So the film is now even more relevant than it was before for a previous generation, which perhaps those who are older, who were already active against the war or in their 20s when the invasion took place and the occupation went on. But there is a new generation that knows nothing about the 2003 war. So the film, despite its limitations, like every film, but also is a snapshot of a very important moment. And to me, I think it just, as we've said before, it really debunks the simplicity with which Iraqis and others are often misrepresented and represented, and gives us depth and shows us also, as I think Maya and others mentioned, that we showed the polyphony of Iraqi voices. We showed and included the opinions that we did not agree with. And so this is a very important document, and I know that it was already being used in plenty of classes. And I always get, as I'm sure you do, get requests about links or copies. So that's why the re-release is very important, particularly that much or many of the problems that went into the way the war was sold and the war was misrepresented continue to be operative in the world we live in. So, and I don't want to keep praising something that we worked on. We'll have to have others praise that.
Maya, do you want to do that? Do you want to praise what we
I
did?
want? Yeah, I teach this film, and I've actually used it pedagogically in both the United States and in Lebanon, in
Did you
classrooms
say
and
Lebanon
workshops.
with an N?
Yeah, I did.
I see. Wow.
Yeah, Lebanon, Villa. So, and I think it's always a wake-up call for me to realize how little people continue to know or invest in knowing or have been taught about Iraq post 2003, and even and pre 2003 also. And I think it's important to, these are not natural sort of phenomena. This is active disappearance. This is sort of a mode of operating to actively disappear some people from the sort of consideration, let's say, as people who have an equal right to this world as everybody else. It's not just somebody, and have an equal right to live in stability, security. Children who deserve and have a right to grow up not in war. So I think it's, these are not, this is sort of an active disappearance of Iraq, both at the time when we made the film up until today. I think this film is a good, particularly in US classrooms, is a good example of how to really present, like, sort of allow people to theorize their own lives, a reminder that actually people are the best narrators of their own lives, and that, like everybody else, people are complex, contradictory, they argue, they disagree. And I think it's somewhat sad to consider this a big deal, right? Because it seems so obvious, and yet it's not. The humanity is actively, like, that consideration of just, people having a history and a life and a social world is actively disappeared. I also think the film really helps us remember and really bring to the fore the kind of beautiful scale of Iraq, the beauty of Iraq, the scale of the city. I remember that's something that really sort of stuck with me, going around the city, just being really sort of wowed by, Sinan was mentioning also just the public art, what's in the beauty of the city. Also, when I have showed it in Beirut in workshops, it's also important, I think, for a lot of Arab audiences continuing to the today, maybe even more today, to also, for people to hear from Iraqis what it was like to live under Saddam Hussein, and to actually hear people narrate their own lives pre-2003. I think that also makes a big impact in how, that's what I've noticed, that it makes a big impact when I show it, because that's also not a narrative that is highlighted in Arab media either, or wasn't, at least. Yeah.
Thank you, Maya. I'll say a couple words and then feel free, Suzy, to chime in. I'd like to say that I just realized that I did not turn on one of the lights, which is why my set looks darker than usual, which I'm kind of enjoying right now. So I'll just say that when we made the film, even though we showed it in a million places, we never really, at least in my experience, we didn't get any serious objection or rejection, or got into any sort of scuffle or any kind of problem in any of the showings, including when we showed it to audiences that involved or included a lot of military personnel. It was actually remarkable how, at most, we would have, different viewpoints, maybe some disagreement, but nothing that rose to the level of a serious altercation, even discursively. However, there were voices that, again, would insist on whatever argument it is. It was an argument that proceeded from U.S. interests, not whether what's happening in Iraq had anything to do with the pretext for the war, which is involvement in 9/11, which of course was not the case. Only in America did polls reveal that most Americans believed that Saddam Hussein had a hand in 9/11, which is something that is not true. Even the CIA later on, a few years after, along with denying that there were massive weapons of mass destruction, that there were links with Al-Qaeda, also revealed that this was not the case. But of course, it was presented as the case, and people believed it because they don't know any better. That Saddam Hussein, who used to actually torture Islamists and kind of and worse, wasn't going to team up with Osama bin Laden or any group of that nature, simply because they don't get along. No, so however, and I would like to repeat this because I've said it before, I think, in some of the recent discussions. After 2008, the receptivity to critique of the quote-unquote benevolence of U.S. foreign policy increased, right? This is something that, of course, existed to some level before 2008, but after the crash and after a number of developments since 2008, not least, the post-COVID or sort of pre-COVID waves of social protests and rising voices regarding issues of gender, race, and sexuality, the receptivity to self-criticism in this country. And I've noticed this in my own classrooms over the past 25 years that I've been teaching. There's been a continuous expansion, at least where I am at, of receptivity to critique and self-criticism. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why this film, which basically addresses some of the worst of imperial hubris on part of the United States, which is the invasion of Iraq on fraudulent grounds, is a fantastic moment. It's a learning moment. It's a teaching moment. And this film in particular, because it was so raw. I mean, everything about it is raw. There's very little was either choreographed or planned ahead of time, in the sense that we didn't actually editorialize. We didn't set up a scene to look a certain way, which of course now happens ad nauseum everywhere, whether in the Egyptian uprising, the Syrian uprising, the Libyan uprising, or other events that happen in the Arab world. This actually was not that. And even films that came after it at the time, whether by people who supported the war or rejected the war, supported or rejected any other aspect of the war or the Iraqi regime and so on, it is distinguished per the writings on the film. We're talking about really serious academic writing on the film, was distinguished by that quality, which is why, besides the fact that we did it and we're proud of it, it is also a testimony to a moment that is going to be very difficult to repeat, if not impossible. So I think it's a fantastic learning tool, and it is something that addresses not just U.S. problematics and its foreign policy, but also the problematics that exist within Arab states in the Arab world, between Arab states in the Arab world, and the kind of double talk that most Arab states are involved in, which you saw in the clip that we showed. I'll stop here and see if Suzy, would you like to share anything about how your experience about how this film can be a teaching tool, whether or not it's an academic or non-academic institutions?
Well, I think you put it together nicely. I mean, I can add that when I was teaching youth media analysis and media studies and post-production and production, I would often use clips from this and other work on Palestine. And this was less divisive than the Palestine stuff, of course. And so it was a way, like you're saying, to get the youth connected, because I would often work with marginalized youth, connected to what was going on and what our government was doing in their name. And I think it was enlightening. It enriched their perspective. And like you're saying, the connections to other aspects of oppression within our own country, and that, rubbed up against their own identities and what they experience, they could see it in the eyes of the people that we put on screen. So I would just add that.
Thank you very much. Any closing words before we move to the last clip? Because the last clip will actually end the conversation. In other words, we're not going to speak after that. So, but we can watch it. So don't just leave as soon as I play it. At least for the sake of the audience, show that you're watching the beginning, and then I'll take it off the screen. I'll take you guys off the screen. Sinand, can you please move a little bit? You're obstructing the award. No, I'm joking. I'll take it off. Never mind. Any last words? I would like to say as a last word that I am I'm so proud of everyone, and I am so in awe of everyone's dedication to this film, who is part of this film. We are the directors, And with the Carol Mansour, Maya Mikdashi, and myself, stayed in an apartment for a month editing it. We also worked with a research team that included other people, Dirar Hakim, Shireen Sayali, Nadia Sbeiti, and Rania Masri, who actually contributed to the research for this film. I'm so proud of everyone. I'm in awe of everyone's dedication. And when we picked up the phone and called or emailed people to come together and do this, it was such a natural act. And it just makes me feel that things like this also create friendships and improve them and enhance them and deepen our commitment to these causes, and frankly empower us. So I'm just that's my last word. I want to say that I'm very happy about that, over and above whatever little this film has contributed to the discourse on Iraq, and I hope that it has and that it will. Maya, Suzy, and Sinan, please feel free. Let's leave the last word to Sinan, because he's out of focus. You're out of focus, Sinan. Is that on purpose?
No.
Okay, go ahead. No, the last. We're leaving the last word for you. So, yeah.
Suzy, you want to go first?
Any last words, Suzy?
I mean, there's so many things to say, yet I'm speechless. But yes, it was a profound impact on myself and working with you all, of course. And there are many things that I could say that I don't think I'm going to articulate right now. But yes, when we look back, and even looking at you all right now, I mean, I haven't seen many of you in years. So there is a way that we're bonded because of this, of course, forever. And I'm happy to be a part of it.
That's awesome. I said it on mute.
I want to sort of add to that. And, I think films are documents of the places they're made, and they're also documents of the people who made them. And this film is no different. It was, again, I think there's this odd interplay between recognizing the sort of catastrophe post 2003, but the way that memory actually does bring us together, and with some warmth and joy. And I will never forget my time in Baghdad. It informed everything that I did subsequently. I also just want to say something about how we work together, because I think it's important. It's also, the film really was, it is what it is. It is what it could be because of Sinan and, his sort of wonderful, beautiful way of just being with people. And and because of Bassam's dynamic sort of bringing us together. And I know personally, I was 22 years old. I did used to run off all the time and film in corners, dark corners, and Bassam would always come running after me. And I always felt very safe. I always felt safe to do this work. And I felt safe, to be honest, in Baghdad. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I think it's very important also to talk about how films are made, how we work together, and that feeling of working together in the end is also what stays beyond just the product.
Yes, I mean this was really truly a team effort, and the visit also impacted me and my writing since then. I have to say, as I always do, that one of the major human forces behind this film, also and so many other projects, is Asmaan Haddad. Asma Haddad, who was a mother not only to Bassam but to many of us. And a lot of the work for this film and for so many projects took place in the Haddad household, where we were all welcomed and we were all tended to and given warmth, especially those of us whose parents are not alive or whose parents are not in this country. And so Asma Haddad, in her own way, with her material support, but also her emotional support, is part of this film and part of the legacy of the film. And needless to say, of course, as Bassam mentioned in the household, she had profound love for the region and for Iraq and for Iraqi culture and music. And this is, as many of you mentioned, it's, I think, in making films or making any work of art, passion is also a prerequisite. And I think we all brought passion for the region, for the place, for the people, and for justice. So thank you, Asma, for being Asma and being in our lives. وين راح بسام؟
وينك يا بسام؟
Bassam. Okay, maybe that's it.
Any other final comments before we show the clip? I actually have to admit that for the sake of the professionalism as well as the as well as the what else other than professionalism, I had to actually turn the lights on to see how different it would be. Oh my god, can we redo this whole thing with this light? You see,
Can we redo this every evening for the next 3 weeks?
بكرة
طيب. Thank you all. Thank you, Sinand, for these nice words. Thanks, Maya. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Suzy. I think we talked everyone's ears off. I'm not sure anybody's watching anymore. We will go to the film next, but before we go to the actual film, before we show the film, which, by the way, I will put the no, that's not it. I will put the that's not it. But this one about Baghdad is now available on youtube.com/Jadaliya. I will leave you with the last clip, which is a discussion between Sinan and a taxi driver, and I was filming the conversation, where the conversation was sufficiently interesting that the taxi driver pulled over and continued the conversation with Sinan, and we left it in the film, even though it showed a lot of tension between Sinan and somebody who is in Iraq, who actually was telling Sinan, you're not living here. We are the ones in pain, and we see the invasion differently. And then, of course, Sinan, with his super eloquence as well as sensitivity and empathy, was able to respond in ways that were not just about the situation in Iraq, but also about the claims that were made by the invaders. I will let you watch this, and I would like to say thank you to all who have persevered for the past 90 minutes. And thanks Maya Mikdashi, Sinan Antoon, Suzy Salamy, and Adam Shapiro, who had to leave, unfortunately, a little while ago. And enjoy this last clip.
Thank you to you, but for your logistics and your genius and having boundless energy and kicking our asses and bringing us together always.
And bad lighting for most of the show, minus the last 2 minutes. Shukran. All right, so I'll play that clip. Shukran to everybody. And here we go. Assalamu alaikum.